Okay, so to start with, we'd like to, what we've done is we've asked the three of these fine people to give us some reflections around the conference. So to start with, what are some highlights of things that you have heard? We're passing the mic.
Do
you want
me to go? Hi, everybody. Alan Mandell from SUNY Empire State University. As Nan said, we were asked to give some reflections, so I'd like to offer some. I guess I would just say, first, I think we all feel this, very honored to be here on this panel, as well as to be at this conference, which, in my view, was quite extraordinary to hear so many views and so many voices. My comments are more me than they are any effort to summarize what went on in a day and a half. So if you would bear with my comments. Oh, closer to me, sorry. I guess I just wanted to start with something that has been on my mind since we got together what seemed to be months ago, but a day and a half ago. We live in a world of incredible conflicts. We live in a world that is in so many ways in crisis. And there are conflicts everywhere across the globe. Some we're aware of, some we're not aware of at all. And I can't get that out of my head, that that's the context of all of our work. It's the terrain in which we live. It's our lives right now, and it's quite inescapable. During this time together, so many thoughts, so many ideas, so many extraordinary articulations of the world of VPL. But what I am left with, actually, is a range of tensions and sometimes conflicts that we all feel. So I tried to write down some of these conflicts, or maybe tensions, and I wonder if you feel them, but I have felt them. So I want to give you a few of these things that were on my mind. First, I think that there's a tension, let's just keep it a tension, about the language that we use. Sometimes we feel it's being very clear, and sometimes we think we're being clear, but the audience to whom we are trying to be clear does not understand what we're talking about. So the issue of language is always there. Have we found the right words? How do we know? Here's a second tension that I have felt that has come up for me many times in these sessions. Sometimes our focus in the world of VPL is on skills, and it's driven by a training agenda. Sometimes we imagine we're talking about learning that is at the core of what we're thinking about. Is there a difference? What's the difference? What are the tensions between our focus on skills and another kind of focus on learning? Here's another one I thought about a lot in the session on policy this morning. Sometimes our focus is on the international. We're so proud to be part of a global world of VPL. That's part of the beauty of our all being here. And sometimes our focus is on the minutely local. What do we, are these reconcilable? How do we think about the local and think about the global simultaneously? That's another tension. Can we reach some kind of balance? Here's another one that I think about a lot, honestly. We acknowledge the significance of guidelines and principles and core values that we really care about. And yet, at the same time, many of us spend our time creating and championing very specific, often inflexible rubrics and frameworks. How do we think about the tensions between those two things? Guiding principles and the rigidity of the frameworks that we sometimes develop. Connected to that, oftentimes our focus is on the individual, and we care very much about the individual. In a session that knucwentwécw-kt and I did this afternoon, it was just very clear when people talk about themselves as change agents, they often think about themselves as focusing on individuals and helping individuals. At the same time, we are completely mired in systems. How do we think about the tensions between this individual level and the system level? Are we protecting the system? Are we helping the individual? Here's another one, and I just have a few more if you would bear with me. We take pride in helping people and in the spirit of supporting individuals. But could it be that there is a tension between the call for support and perhaps the ways in which we may unconsciously try to mold that person to the status quo, to the system that exists? We wouldn't say we're doing it, but I wonder if sometimes we are. And that's connected to another thing that came up this morning and yesterday a couple of times. We absolutely see ourselves, and this is part of the spirit of this whole conference, as being forces of inclusivity. Can we simultaneously think about the ways in which we are also creating new barriers? Can we be claiming inclusivity, but in the ways in which we do these things also create new barriers? I will just say two more, and then I promise to stop here. I guess I wondered if there are ways in which we think of ourselves as experimenters, as searching for alternatives all the time, that we are open to new ways of doing these things. But I wonder if in some way in our work, we also fight to keep the policies that protect us and that keep us in our jobs and in the work that we do. I guess I will close with just this one. We want to see ourselves as voices of progress, and that what we do is an act toward liberation. That's a big deal for all of us. But could it be that at the same time that we are supporting systems that are actually more elaborate systems of surveillance? We think we're not doing that, but might we be doing that in different kinds of ways? I guess I will end with this. Nan said this at the start of this conference a day and a half ago, that we purposely kept the question mark after the word democracy. And I think that's another one of these tensions. How do we know if what we're doing is about democracy at all? Thanks so much.
Oh, no, it's got to go to one of you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Alan. They're certainly very big questions. It is absolutely a privilege to sit here, and in fact it has been such a pleasure to have these days to set aside to listen and to think. And those were some of the most important things I think that I could have done over the last 2 days. And I've been around this story for a long time, and the pleasure of being in a room with, you know, not just 10 or 20, but hundreds of like-minded individuals is a rare pleasure and a rare opportunity. So I really appreciate it. I have been listening carefully. And there's a couple of things that I want to go back through and think about over the conference, and a lot of things that I'll need to take away and consider and reflect on over time. But I want to start back with some thoughts from the very early, the keynote address, and the idea that in moments of recognition, democracy happens. And I think that really resonated very closely with me. And we saw in that address learning and recognition of learning as a path to emancipation. And we in Ireland are certainly not unique in the sense of the importance that freedom and emancipation holds for us all as a people. So democracy is a whole of life concept. And I propose that recognition is also a whole of life kind of concept. Starting from the image we were given of parents recognizing their children, and it right throughout our lives, recognition is important for our existence. But in a way, we've spoken about recognition and recognition processes and assumed that there are individuals who would come to us and seek that kind of recognition. That's been the way it's been. And one of the things I thought about today was, have you ever had that situation, maybe even you had it over the last couple of days, where you're talking to somebody and the person that you're talking to, knows you're there and recognizes you and is responding, but is also scanning the room for somebody else, or perhaps somebody more important. And it came to me, who do we want recognition from? And as the person who seeks recognition, is that our right to decide from whom and why we would want that recognition? So that kind of idea of recognition and empowering the seeker, the applicant, the claimant, to decide the context in which they might want that recognition or from whom. I think that's important because we asked questions about who gets to decide which knowledge is valid. And I think it's important because that depends on the context. There isn't a universal answer for who gets to decide what I do is valid. If I'm, playing sport, I have one kind of learning that's valid, and if I'm in a professional workplace, I have a different kind of learning that I expect to be recognized for and to be valid. So there isn't one answer to that question. It has to be contextual. And that brings me to the other idea that learning happens everywhere, and it happens throughout life, and it serves different needs. And so does validation. Validation serves different needs. And the person who's seeking validation should get to decide what need they want to serve. So if you think about the process and the identification and the documentation and the assessment and the certification, all of these different steps in the process, it's important for us to understand that each of those steps has a value in and of itself, as part of a process. And each of those steps has different structures and different systems. And I don't see systems as a barrier. And Alan challenged us that maybe our systems are a barrier in some ways, but it depends on how you look at it. I see our systems as supportive. And I think what's important is that there's a balance between the level of formality needed and the kind of flexibility that's needed. Because I see quality assurance as a really important part of the trust in the process. At an individual level and at a systems level and at an educational institution level and even at a societal level, quality assurance is an important part of the trust in the process, the value. And I think the word I would look for here is proportionality. So I don't believe we're creating barriers, but I think we need to have proportional systems in place to support, appropriate systems in place to support different people, different learners, and different needs. And that brings me to another thought about the purpose of the process. So what's the context within which the learning seeks recognition? What's the context within which the learner comes to talk to us? And we did hear a lot in this conference about people wanting to be valued and to be visible in and of themselves, and that's vital in society. We heard about them wanting to gain from or contribute to society. But we also heard really important things about wanting access to the labour market, wanting to progress in their careers, wanting to be able to achieve higher learning, and, you know, in real terms, wanting to progress and offer better opportunities for their families. And one of the things that really struck me, it was a piece I was at that Heidi Bolton, I think, talked about, and she talked about, for me, it really struck me that one of the first, or the first piece of legislation that the new South African government created was around a quality assurance framework, or a framework to establish a quality assurance system for their education processes in the context of 32% unemployment. I don't see a great big difference between society and the economy. In fact, they work hand in hand. They're part of each other. And I think in that way, the need to advance skills, the need to give people access to higher order jobs, to occupations, to give contributions proportionate to their ability to contribute is a really important part of the validation process. And I think that brings us to, I suppose, the role, because I come from a higher education system, I have written down a number of points that higher education systems need to take into account to support that kind of validation, to support transitions. I don't see a big difference between skills and learning and knowledge and education. I don't draw barriers there. I think all of our learning is applicable. Learning can be created in the practice domain as well as being applied within that domain. And actually, I see the challenge for higher education systems in changing themselves to recognize that learning and to fit it into their systems where appropriate and where proportional. So I don't know if I have time now, but I certainly have a number of things that I think higher education should and could do. Do you want to hear them?
Why don't we go?
Yeah.
We can do that on our round.
Sure.
Okay. Also, thank you very much for inviting me and to have me on the panel. I represent the European Association for the Education of Adults, and with that we represent mainly non-formal adult education here in Ireland. You would probably call it community education. It has all kinds of names, but it tends to be general and liberal adult education. Now, we do not play that strong a role in the discussion of validation because on the one hand, some of our learners just don't want to be validated. They just participate in learning and that's it. And that's very, very legitimate. Others, of course, will take the step and try to validate their knowledge. It might be you have both mentioned the intention of learning can be very, very different. You know, we have lots of learners. I was teaching myself for a long time ago, but I had in my English classes lots of people whose children had started school and wanted to catch up and wanted to be able to help their children. So not a professional activity, but something that was very, very important to them. And of course, we also have, and that is a target group that is very, very important, and it has been mentioned in quite a few contexts, that is people who did not find their place in a formal context, who dropped out of school, who lack basic skills, who have low formal qualifications. And here we really need to be very, very concerned is the wrong way. That goes in the direction what Alan has said. But these are the learners we need to put into the center. definitely these learners and, as has been mentioned, many others. Alan has mentioned the tension of, aren't we sort of molding them even if we don't want to do that? And I think the approach of taking the learner's voice into account can really help here, to have a way of working with them that starts with their, and here I'm going back to what Professor Fleming said, to look at their potential before we look into the past, what they have learned. I really like that turnaround, that we do not start with, okay, so, but where do you want to go? What do you want to achieve? And then fitting everything to that. And that, for me, was the highlight of the conference, to consider and to think and to hear from different voices of where do we need to start. Now, I can only insist that as non-formal adult educator, for me, it is the individual. I've heard that from a number of you as well. But someone said, shouldn't the job that this person can have be in the center? Or shouldn't it be the job market? Because many people actually want to enter the labor market, or not only enter the labor market, to make progress in their career. So shouldn't we do that? Someone else said on the panel here, shouldn't we put the system in the center so that we can make progress? So there are, and it really depends on where you're coming from, but where do we start and where can we make progress? And the follow-up question, which I might already go too far, for me the question I'm taking further is, how do we work with that? How can we have all these demands and suggestions to put the individual, the system, into the center of attention? How can we work with that? How do we find a solution? Where does the money, I mean, there are lots of questions that come with that, but I'll stop here for the time being, and thank you again. And yes, individual, yay.
Thank you. Those were very thoughtful, insightful comments. We have another question for you. Are there any lingering thoughts or questions that you have? And perhaps we can start with Gina this time.
Yes, I can build on that, what I just said. Where do we start the discussion? And how do we shape the system? I have to say I was very impressed by the work, Thompson Rivers University, did I get that right? Where are the Canadians?
Right there.
Yes, of course, you, yeah. Because on the one hand, you're a higher education institution where you are in a framework of credits and a system that has become a bit more flexible, but still stands for a framework. But on the other hand, you have tried to adapt how you work with validation and the people, to adapt it as much so that you can, what I gather from your presentation, to be as learner-centered as possible. And I found that an approach that I find important to follow up. Thank you for providing that thought. The question now for me is, how can we take that example, or similar examples, there were more in the room, and fit it also with a system? I mean, we had a similar discussion about evidence. I'm very much with Brikena. We need to, we need to ask the learners, we need to ask the learners to give us the story, and the difference that we make is actually in every individual who has the opportunity to reach out. to achieve something, to feel better, to be healthier, and all the big advantages that you have when you restart or go back to learning. But on the other hand, the evidence, I understand that it's not enough to have some learner stories. You need a larger societal, economic research, hands-on evidence. So how can we, there is a tradition in feminist research and so on to have the double approach and show both sides. So probably this is where we need to go. But how do we then link it up with how we do a very learner-centered approach in different systems that are differing in rigidity, and how can we make progress? I want to add one more thought, and that is we work a lot in EAA, but also our members work a lot on access and outreach. We need to reach more learners. We need to underline the benefits of learning, and we need to create better access to learning. It is very often the barriers. Sometimes there are those discussions where people talk about the motivation of people. I don't really believe in that the motivation of people is the real barrier. I think it's the being kept from appropriate learning and not having the right learning opportunities. So how can we more strongly link access, outreach, validation, and making sure that there is a system, and not the same system that failed them. That is the issue. Because if you are meant to go into a formal system and you failed in the formal system, that's not going to help you. So we need to make sure that people can be reached, can access, and then go into a system that is more appropriate to them. And that is a huge challenge.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think the important thing about validation and people is just that they will come with different needs and different learning, and they will expect to be responded to where they are, if you know what I mean, as opposed to where we are. It's like your conversation earlier about the collective, Nan. So I think recognizing that people will come in different ways and different needs. And one of the questions that was asked during the course of the conference, I can't remember who, so I can't attribute it, but it was who's in charge of validation? Is it the inclusion folks? Is it the education folks? Is it the employment structures? And I suppose what I'm wondering is does validation have to be just one thing? Surely it's everything that's needed at any point in time, or surely there are different paths through depending on where that applicant or claimant or learner or person, citizen, whatever you want to call them, depending on where they are in their life as opposed to in their learning, and what they need from it. And I think that's it. To some extent, the barrier is trying to say validation is one thing and it should be offered in one shape and one form and one system. And I suppose that's what I'm trying to say about proportionality. Depending on what they want from it, we need to approach it in different ways. And that's definitely, I think, part of the response is to say, yes, it lies in all those places. And at the same time, and I think it was Ernesto, we also need to offer some kind of coherence and consistency, because we are in this dynamic and globally challenged and difficult world that people are experiencing in very real ways and coming to systems in very real ways. So we need to meet them where they are. But yeah, I don't think it has to be one response. It should be each of our systems molding itself so that it is ready to offer, I think, a response.
Yeah, I appreciate my colleagues' comments, and I guess I have a slightly different take on this. I think systems have a tendency in the world in which we live toward processes of rationalization and I guess a kind of instrumentalization. And I think that it's interesting. I don't have a solution to this. I do think it's honestly a tension to think about how do we respond to the call for standardization, which speaks in the voice of quality control. That's what happens. And I'm worried, it worries me, when I think about the proliferation of systems, rubrics, unbelievably rigid and infinitely created ways in which we say we can evaluate people. I worry, this was my kind of panopticon dystopian worry, that we could be in a world where everybody's evaluated based on a rubric and everybody's evaluated on absolutely everything they do. Do we want to do that? I'm being serious. I mean, it seems to me that, and here's the where the world we're in, I think, is so interconnected. If we claim we don't want that and that we are truly focused on the individual, I think we then have to ask the question, what kinds of support systems have to be in place to provide that? Which immediately segues into, and who's going to pay for it? It's labor intensive. The focus on scalability is about efficiency, and it's about creating methods of evaluation that are simpler to provide. Once we begin to say, hold on a second, there are individual learnings, we're trying to talk about the individual, that brings forth a whole other set of expectations about how do we really do that? Who's going to pay for it? We heard about systems, I'm so sorry, I think it was in the Swedish example, when people talk about it's free, and in other contexts, there is no money. So how can we be honest with ourselves about the kinds of systems we are setting up and whether we can pull them off? Not just the ideal, but whether they are things that really can respond to people. And I guess, sorry, one other little piece. We have to be honest about what we can provide. We can't promise something that we can't pull off, because I think that leads to a kind of cynicism that people have, which is horrible. And I think actually some of us as practitioners also feel that kind of cynicism, like, look what we're promising, but it's not what we deliver. So I think that, again, I don't have an answer. I just think we have to be aware of these tensions that we find ourselves in.
We've plenty of time. Okay, great. Okay, I was just checking time and everybody's tiredness levels, but this really is wonderful. My closing question really is your final reflections, and I have to say I'm really enjoying this conversation and the different lens that you bring to the overall discussions, because there's been so many and so many different dimensions reflected. So, final reflections, your last thoughts, closing out.
I'm going to give my final reflection. Okay. In his keynote, which I really did think in Ted's keynote, which I thought was really provocative and really interesting to me, because of his, for many reasons, but one, because of this question about what does emancipation refer to? What do we mean by that? He uttered a little phrase that I wrote down that I thought was just absolutely great. It was just in passing. And he said, the work we do is, and here were his words, loaded with generosities. I will never forget that. I just thought, I don't think I've ever heard that phrase, loaded with generosities. And I took it that a great deal of the spirit of our days together here in Ireland have been loaded with generosities.
Thanks very much for that question, Andrina. That's a lovely thought, loaded with generosities. Yeah, really nice. Look, I suppose when I think about what Alan talks about in this kind of whole person and I suppose the deeply individual meaning making, I mean, I would restrict to some extent what we do, and I'm speaking very much from a higher education perspective, in the sense that I don't think that a higher education institution probably can or should ever seek to, you know, recognize or make meaning of every aspect of a human being. I have a number of different degrees, and I'm very happy that those are the bits of my learning that those different universities recognized at that time, but that there is a whole other person, flawed as she is, behind all of that they haven't seen or recognized. I'm not sure I'd want them to. They may not have conferred me. So I think what I'm interested in is the people who come to us and the reasons why they come to us and how they want to use the validation process to enhance their contribution to society and their ability to get decent jobs or work or different things. And there's a couple of things I want to say as final reflections if I have a few minutes. I mean, one is that I see quality assurance as somebody spoke about it earlier. I see quality assurance and the national framework of qualifications and things like that as something that I think it was Helen spoke about earlier, as a boundary object, as something that helps us to translate across different domains. I see those things as vital rather than barriers, and maybe that's I'm an engineer, I probably should have confessed that up front. I see them facilitating mobility of people, of learners, of qualifications, of skills, of tasks, all those kind of things. And I think as a final reflection that there's a huge challenge for us in higher education to think about the program development processes in the context of, you know, what is there? What learning is already there, to design a program with the view that RPL applicants will come and will bring different knowledge sets. And I was hugely enthused, Nan will tell you, by her piece earlier, which was looking at these are the knowledge sets that we currently want you to demonstrate for a particular program, but we're willing to listen to all of this other knowledge that you might have developed in the construct of this content and shift our thinking in terms of what's important. And that's the challenge for us, you know, and to be willing to shift our thinking. And at that time, I gave the example of saying, you know, universities can teach computer science for years, and suddenly the practice domain will find something new. 12 years ago in Ireland, it was cloud computing, a new thing. You know, we didn't know what it meant, how we heard of it. And it came from the practice domain, not from university experts, but we were willing to go over there and find out about those things and then build a program around it. And in that way, recognize knowledge that had come from that domain. And that's where I don't think we're obstructing access. That's where I think we're shifting our thinking to embrace what's happening in the practice domain. And to me, that's really important. The other thing that I think is key is to develop and encourage diverse and authentic assessment methodologies. And another thing, again, I'm like a fan girl here, that Nan had said earlier, was that, you know, a lot of our assessment techniques are better at finding out what you don't know rather than what you do know. And that's, you know, that's another thing that's really important. And we have, I think, to be fair to higher education in Ireland, like the last 20 years, have seen huge changes in assessment methodologies. And those changes actually awaken you and prepare you for the kind of assessment of portfolios and complex learning. Like I heard somebody early on in the conference talk about a portfolio as a narrative text-based things. But if you're in a university that has a music conservatory, then a portfolio includes performances, or it includes welding joints, or photography and videos. And, you know, I mean, to be fair, I think those are the things where we should be making progress, because that the ability to demonstrate knowledge and skills, like which is more important? I mean, writing an essay about music or composing and playing a piece, which is more authentic? And I do think, to be fair, we have made progress in those domains. And the other thing I want to say, my two small things, sorry, the MARTE project, the idea of deliberately linking the development of learning outcomes to skills needs, I don't think that's narrow or short-sighted. I think that's really vital in terms of what you're selling people and the opportunities you're giving them, if that's what they want. Again, back to the person comes seeking recognition, and they should be empowered to know the kind of recognition that they're seeking. So the last thing I want to say is, to drive this further on, one of the things we need to do is tell the people. I think one of the things that will make our systems change is demand. And I've spent years being really cautious and saying, oh gosh, don't raise expectations you can't meet. But now at this stage in my life, as old as I am, I'm throwing caution to the wind and saying, damn it, tell them all they can come and see what the system does to answer it.
Yes, if you allow me, I'll come from a completely different side and talk about my own learning experience here, which has been fabulous. And I can say I looked outside at the wall and I've seen that reflected by a lot of other comments, how inspiring and interesting and all kinds of positive things. Everyone has experienced that. I can also say I have worked in adult education for quite a long time, and sometimes you are in events where you go, okay, I've heard that before, and this was not one of them. And I really appreciate the geographic diversity. It's been very, very interesting to learn from other countries, from countries outside of Europe, and so on, but also the diversity of the sectors and the diversity of the levels where people are working. You would think that is a bit more difficult, but it's not, and that also made it inspiring. Some of you work directly in validation, you work with the people. Some of you are in policy, some of you are in international organizations. And those viewpoints I have also found incredibly inspiring. So thank you all for that. And I can say those 2 days I did more learning than in a lot of other contexts.
Thank you so much. Andrina, Susan, and I we have a few announcements, and then we're going to have a closing. The very first announcement is those of you who are members of our coordinating group, could you, at the close, come down front? We just want to talk to you for a minute, so I don't want to lose that. Once more, I'm going to remind you about Play-O. So much of what we've heard, even if you weren't presenting, there may be things that you're bubbling, or maybe you have presented and you would like to put some things together. We still have some more of the cards, so if anyone would like to grab that. What we're asking is by the 20th that all you submit is an abstract. That could be 1 or 2 paragraphs. All that does is tell us that you're interested and this is kind of what you're thinking about. That helps us as a team to kind of start to think about how we want to put this together. We may end up with more than 1 volume at this point. You know, if all of you submit it, it'd be amazing. So we really want to be able to continue the conversation, and I think I'm turning to you, Susan, to talk about that.
Yes, I have a couple of things to share. So we are going to look for ways to continue the conversation. Some of the ideas we're exploring is webinars to keep us engaged, the journal, of course, and if you have other ideas, please send them our way. Speaking of which, watch your emails. We will be sending you an evaluation form, a feedback form. We want to measure the success of this conference, which I'm kind of laughing because there's many ways The presentations will be on the website. Give us a week, maybe 2 weeks to get those on, but watch for the website for the PowerPoints and whatnot to become present. And I'm going to take a quick moment to, is there a woman here from Greenland still? Thank you. I want to thank you. You shared one of the most profound statements I've heard in a long time. Just yesterday, we were at a session on, you would never guess, RPL. And you said these very simple words, "Why can't I sing my learning?" What a profound statement. And I'm going to put that back to each and every one in the room. Why can't we sing our learning? Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.
Tina, can you? There's a book in my bag. There's a book in my bag. Sorry.
No, a book. There's a book. Sorry, I just need. Thanks. Perfect. Thank you very much. That's a really good question, Susan, and very, very pertinent to the moment that we're in. So it's come to me to do the final farewell, and to obviously it falls to thank a few people, which is extraordinary. But singing is actually really topical, isn't that extraordinary? Whoops, sorry, I'm not great with microphones and all sorts of things. It's been amazing, hasn't it? I think when Irene called the Biennale a common good and a treasure, I think he really hit the nail on the head. We've had an opportunity for a conversation and a dialogue which has been global, but it's also been very deeply personal, I think, for most of us. And like most things, I think there's a lot of stuff here that we just need to go away and really think about. I think there are conversations that have been purposeful, they've been careful, and there's been a lot of engagement which has been very carefully worked through. People have planned very carefully what they have shared with us, the presentations, the conversations that we've had with each other. And going back to Ted's opening presentation, his keynote address, this opportunity for conversation, it was personal, but it was also political, because we recognized each other, and in that recognition, we were changed. And as Irene said, it brought us a certain freedom, and there was a certain emancipation in it. And the question mark is always there, was this democracy in action? We talked about people, validation, and power, and I think that as people together, there was a power in what we did. And that's something, again, that I think will remain with us as we go forward. So many of you have come and said to various people who are part of the consortium, part of the co-organisers group, that you're interested in hosting the next Biennale, and that's really, really exciting. It's a great place to be. So we would like to express our thanks again to the hotel, obviously, and to the organising team, people who've worked so hard to make this happen, but also most especially to you, the delegates, people who've stuck the course and who've participated so enthusiastically and so energetically. And I think probably most profoundly to people who've travelled extraordinary distances, 5 continents and 31 countries. So some of you have come huge distances, and we really, really want to acknowledge that. You came and you must have been exhausted. You must be really, really tired by now. So we really, really want to just say we appreciate that so much. We appreciate everything that you've brought and that you shared with us in all of that. To people who spoke as part of the panels, you've left us so much food for thought. And we're really grateful for it, and there's really no other word for that. I just want to thank in particular, and I hope they've been cooperative and come into the room. I don't know if they have or not, but Alison, Grania, Jennifer, Anne and Maria, who are responsible for all of the really detailed work that has gone on behind this in terms of our badges, doing so much work. And I'd also have to say Sam back in Canada who didn't travel. But we have very small gifts for them, and I don't know where they are, but I hope that they are here. Did they come in? Did anyone manage to get them in? Oh, they're going to get them. Okay. So just to thank them on that, and I would ask if they do come in, if we can all just, you know, do the normal thing and give them a big chance, a big clap. I'm going to read a quick poem when they're coming, and then we have a surprise song for you, and I'll explain that in a minute. But this is a poem by Seamus Heaney, who's an Irish poet, and it's from the Republic of Conscience. And the important thing really is in the, oh, here they come. Come on, whoa. We just wanted to thank you. This is Alison and Anne, who have to stand for the entire team who have put all of this together. And when I tell you, she really is going to have words, but they haven't slept for a very long time, and they have worked week in, week out for a very long time to get everything done. So we're asking you to accept this from all of us with our really deep and sincere appreciation. Thank you. Where's Maria Casey? Is she around anywhere? She will be found. Okay, this is just, I'll do this fairly quickly, and then our final song will be from a very good friend of ours, Mary Stokes, who is here as an RPL practitioner. For those of you that are staying in Dublin tonight, Mary has told us there's always good music in a pub called the Cobblestones, which is up in Smithfield. Mary says she won't be there, but it is the music is good. Heaney, as you know, is a Nobel Prize winner, and this is a poem from the Republic of Conscience. When I landed in the Republic of Conscience, it was so noiseless when engines stopped. I could hear a curlew high above the runway. At immigration, the clerk was an old man who produced a wallet from his homespun coat and showed me a photograph of my grandfather. The woman in customs asked me to declare the words of our traditional cures and charms to heal dumbness and to avert the evil eye. There was no porter, no interpreter, no taxi. You carried what you had to, and very soon your symptoms of creeping privilege disappeared. Fog is a dreaded omen, but lightning spells universal good, and parents hang swaddled infants in trees during thunderstorms. Salt is their precious mineral, and seashells are held to the ear during births and funerals. The base of all inks and pigments is seawater. Their sacred symbol is a stylized boat. The sail is an ear, the mast a sloping pen, the hull a mouth shape, the keel an open eye. At their inauguration, public leaders must swear to uphold unwritten law and weep to atone for their presumption to hold office and to affirm their faith that all life sprang from salt and tears which the sky god wept after he dreamt that his solitude was endless. I came back from that frugal republic with my 2 arms the one length, the customs woman having insisted that my allowance was myself. The old man rose and gazed into my face and said that was official recognition, that I was now a dual citizen. He therefore desired me when I got home to consider myself a representative and to speak on their behalf in my own tongue. Their embassies, he said, were everywhere, but operated independently, and no ambassador would ever be relieved. As you go home, good day, Shivaslan, may you travel safely. Your ambassadorship from the VPL Biennale, the 5th, co-hosted between Ireland, Canada, and the United States. Your ambassadorship will never be relieved. Mary, we hand it over to you.
I'm keeping an eye on the words because it's a song I have yet to... I am debuting it here for you, so I hope you enjoy. A request for Andrina. Of all the money that e'er I spent it in good company, and of all the harm that I ever did, alas, it was to no one but me. and all I've done for want of wit to memory I can't recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. If I had money enough to spend and leisure to sit a while, there is a fair one in the town that surely has my heart beguiled. His rosy cheeks and ruby lips, I own he has my heart enthralled. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. Oh, all the comrades that I ever had, they are sorry for going away. And all the sweethearts that I had, they'd wish me one more day to stay. But since it falls unto my lot that I should rise and you should not, I'll gently rise and fully call. Good night and joy be with you all. Good night and joy be with you all. Gur maith.
Thank you, Cook's Jam. Safe travels home, everyone. This is the conclusion of the 5th Biennale.